The year was 1876, and the prairie sky burned with the fading glow of evening as a lone figure stepped down from a stagecoach. The wooden wheels rattled into the distance, carrying dust and echoes away, leaving her stranded at the edge of a land that seemed to stretch forever. Della Whitmore stood with her small carpetbag clutched to her chest, her dark hair tangled from days of travel, her prairie dress wrinkled and dulled by the road. The air carried a sharp bite of spring wind, whispering across the plains like a reminder that she did not belong here, that she was misplaced, a name forgotten on the lips of fate. She whispered, barely audible, "I have nowhere else to go," and the wind seemed to take her words as if it had been waiting to hear them. She had been promised a welcome, a man who had written her tender letters, signed in bold script. But as she arrived and asked the driver to point her toward the ranch, a cruel truth cut its way into her chest. The name on the envelope she carried did not match the land she had been brought to. This was not the homestead of the man she had been betrothed to through paper and hope. It was another ranch entirely. By the time she understood her mistake, the coach was already a ribbon of dust on the horizon, and she stood alone with a single choice: knock on the door of a stranger or surrender herself to the night. The ranch stood against the dying sun, a silhouette of weathered wood, its fences stretching out like tired arms. Smoke curled from the chimney, steady and thin, a promise of warmth. She walked toward it, every step heavy with dread. Her heart thudded in her chest, and each time she faltered, she reminded herself she had no one waiting anywhere else. She reached the door, lifted her hand, and knocked. The hollow echo of her knock sounded louder than a gunshot in her ears. The door opened, and there stood Michael Ashford. He was taller than any man she had ever seen, his shoulders broad, his face marked by the wind and sun, yet striking in its quiet symmetry. His blue eyes were steady, cautious, like a man accustomed to solitude. He looked down at her with a silence that stretched not unkind, but unreadable, the kind that made her want to shrink into herself. She swallowed, trembling, and forced her words out. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice a rasp of dust and desperation. "I thought this was another ranch, but I have nowhere else to go." For a moment he said nothing, his gaze moving over her tired shoes, the threadbare bag, the fragile resolve barely holding her upright. Something shifted in his eyes then, some glimmer of understanding, though his face remained carved from stone. At last he stepped back, his voice low, roughened by years of little use. "Come inside. It's cold." The warmth of the hearth hit her like a wave. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, leather, and earth. He motioned toward a chair by the fire. She sat, her hands trembling around the carpetbag in her lap. He busied himself with the kettle, pouring water into a blackened pot that hissed and spit. He moved with a quiet efficiency, every action precise, as though silence itself was a language he had mastered. He placed a mug of coffee before her, strong and bitter, and a piece of bread that crumbled in her hands. She ate slowly, each bite carrying the sharp ache of hunger. He said nothing, only watched her with a measured calm that unsettled and steadied her at once. When she had finished, he spoke. "Name." His voice was not unkind, only stripped of softness. "Della Whitmore," she said, clutching the mug as if it might shield her. He nodded once, his gaze lowering to the fire. Silence stretched again, not empty, but heavy, filled with things neither dared to say. She wanted to tell him the whole truth, that she had come here as a bride for another man, that she had been abandoned before even arriving. Shame pressed against her throat, and she bit it back. For now, it was enough that he had not turned her away. He set out a quilt on the narrow cot in the corner, his hands rough but careful, like a man who knew the value of small mercies. "You can rest there," he said. "Tomorrow we'll see what can be done." The firelight flickered across his face, softening its sternness. She murmured her thanks, her voice breaking on the word. That night, wrapped in the scent of wood smoke and wool, she listened to the silence of the cabin and wondered why a man so strong, so capable, lived alone in a house that felt both warm and hollow. Sleep came heavy, tangled with dreams of loss and strange, unspoken safety. Morning brought whispers. When she stepped outside with Michael to fetch water from the well, Clara May Bennett passed along the road, her bonnet sharp against the sky, her voice sharper still. "Already found yourself a roof, haven't you, girl?" she said, eyes darting between Della and Michael. "Didn't take long." She did not bother to lower her voice. Others nearby turned their heads, curiosity sparking in their eyes. Heat flared in Della's cheeks, shame biting at her skin. She gripped the bucket tighter, wishing the earth would open and swallow her. But Michael, silent as always, took the bucket from her hands and walked beside her back to the cabin. His silence was not cowardice, it was defiance, a wall against gossip meant to shield them both. In that quiet strength, she saw a dignity she had never known. As the day stretched on, she helped him with the horses, her skirts dusted, her hands raw. The animals seemed to sense her gentleness, nuzzling her palms, their dark eyes reflecting a trust she did not yet have in herself. Michael watched her without comment, his presence steady. The silence between them became less a chasm, more a bridge. That evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, she found the courage to speak. Her voice trembled, but she forced the truth out, each word scraping her throat. "I wasn't meant to come here. I was promised to another man, letters, arrangements. But he never came. He left me with nothing. I thought I could still belong somewhere, but," her voice broke, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "No one wants a woman already abandoned. No one wants the shame I carry." For a long moment, he said nothing. His gaze was steady, his jaw set, but his eyes held something softer, something unspoken. He did not touch her, did not offer hollow comfort. Instead, he fed another log to the fire, the flames rising with a crackle. His silence was a shelter, an answer in itself. She felt, for the first time in years, that she was not being judged but simply seen. Night fell, the prairie wind howling against the walls. Inside, the cabin held a quiet warmth, a fragile peace suspended in flickering light. Della sat by the fire, her heart aching with both fear and fragile hope. Michael sat across from her, his face half in shadow, unreadable. The silence stretched, and just as she thought she could bear it no longer, he finally spoke, his voice low, weighted with something she could not yet name. "You've told me your secret," he said. "Maybe it's only fair you know mine." And in that single sentence, the air shifted, the firelight catching his eyes with a glint of something buried deep. Della's breath caught, knowing that whatever he was about to reveal might change everything she thought she knew about him, and about the fragile safety she had just begun to feel beneath his roof. The fire hissed as the log split open, and Michael's voice lingered in the silence, like a confession too heavy to vanish. "Maybe it's only fair you know mine," he had said, and the words cut through Della's chest sharper than the cold wind rattling the cabin walls. She sat frozen, her hands folded in her lap, her breath shallow, waiting for the weight of what he carried. He stared into the flames, his face shadowed, his jaw tight. "I can't have children," he murmured at last, as though speaking it aloud would bind it into the air forever. "Doctors, prayers, remedies, none of it matters. It's a truth I carry. A ranch like this is meant for sons and heirs, but mine will end with me. The town knows it. They whisper behind my back. Some call me half a man." His eyes shifted, finally meeting hers, and in them she saw not weakness, but a raw wound he kept hidden under years of silence. Della's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she felt an ache rise in her chest, the echo of her own shame mirrored in his. He had given her his secret not as a plea, but as a truth, laid bare like a scar. Her heart, long bruised by rejection, bent toward him with a tenderness she did not dare name. She whispered, "And yet you stand taller than any man I've known." He said nothing in reply, but something unspoken passed between them, fragile as glass, steady as stone. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, though shadows of gossip hung over them like circling crows. Della rose early, helping in the kitchen, learning the rhythm of the ranch, her skirts brushing against hay and dust. Michael never asked her to stay, yet he never once suggested she leave. Their silences grew companionable, the quiet filled with the scrape of chairs, the creak of barn doors, the low murmur of cattle. At night, The fire burned between them, a wordless pact of endurance. But the town was less forgiving. Whispers grew louder, carried by Clara May Bennett's sharp tongue. At the mercantile, Della felt eyes on her, women pulling their daughters closer, men glancing with suspicion. "That one's trouble," someone muttered. "Already throwing herself at Ashford." Another voice hissed, "He's a fool to take her in. Can't give him children, can't give him pride. They'll both drown in shame." Della kept her chin lowered, her hand steady as she bought flour and beans, but inside, she felt her chest splintering. The ache of being unwanted pressed heavier with each word. That Sunday, she stood with Michael at the church steps. The bell tolled, echoing across the town like a call to judgment. Conversations stilled as they walked past. Clara May's voice, sharp as a thorn, pierced the hush. "There they are, the stray and the barren man. A fine pair, wouldn't you say?" Laughter rippled from a few cruel mouths. Heat flushed Della's cheeks, shame burning like fire in her blood. She wanted to pull away, to save him from the stain of her presence. But then, without hesitation, Michael's hand reached for hers. He clasped it firmly, publicly, his eyes fixed forward as if daring anyone to speak again. The world seemed to still. Gasps rose, whispers tumbled, but his hand remained steady around hers, his silence louder than any words. That night, as rain pattered against the roof, Della sat by the fire, her heart twisting with a storm of gratitude and fear. She turned to him, her voice breaking. "You shouldn't have done that. They'll only hate you more for standing with me." He looked at her then, his face half in shadow, half in flame. "Let them," he said simply. "I've lived with their whispers long enough. Another won't break me." She lowered her gaze, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm afraid I'll ruin you." His silence stretched, then he leaned forward slightly, his voice softened. "You've given me something they can't take away, someone who sees me, not what I lack." Her tears spilled then, unbidden, and she whispered her own truth. "I was cast aside before I even arrived. Promised letters, vows written on paper. But the man who claimed to want me left me stranded, shamed. I came here with nothing but a name no one wanted." She lifted her eyes to him, trembling. "But in your house, for the first time, I have felt safe." Michael said nothing more, but his gaze did not waver, and in that silence, she felt a vow form between them. Spring storms swept the plains in the days that followed. One night, thunder cracked across the sky, rattling windows and shaking the barn. Horses stamped in panic, their cries cutting through the rain. Della and Michael rushed into the storm, the wind lashing their faces, the ground slick with mud. Together they fought to calm the herd, their hands brushing as they steadied a frightened stallion. Lightning split the night, illuminating his face close to hers, water dripping from his hair, eyes burning with a fierce calm. In that moment, fear and trust wove together, a bond forged not in declarations, but in survival side by side. When at last the storm eased and they stood soaked and shivering, a breathless silence hung between them, a closeness neither dared name. But peace never lasted long. A week later, Sheriff Amos Clay rode to the ranch, his weathered face grim. He dismounted, holding a letter in his hand. "Della," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the town behind it, "your first intended has lodged a complaint. Claims you misled him, that you abandoned your arrangement to ensnare Michael instead. Folks are whispering of fraud, of scandal." His gaze shifted to Michael, heavy with caution. This could grow ugly. Della's heart plummeted, her breath catching. Shame clawed at her throat, dragging her back into the pit she thought she had left behind. She turned toward Michael, words tumbling out in panic. "I never meant, Michael, I swear I never meant to." But her voice broke under the weight of despair. She saw in his silence the risk he bore, the ruin her presence could bring. Tears blurred her vision. "I should go," she whispered. "I'll only destroy what's yours." The sheriff's words lingered like a sentence hanging over them, but Michael stepped forward, his presence filling the room like thunder. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, the kind of voice that silenced crowds. "No, you'll not go anywhere." He turned to the sheriff, his broad frame casting a shadow that seemed to grow larger with each word. This woman is under my roof. She is under my name. Whatever past she carries, I accept it as my own. She is mine and I am hers." The words struck like lightning, echoing into every corner of the cabin. Della gasped, her tears spilling freely, her heart thundering with both fear and wonder. Sheriff Clay's gaze softened, a slow nod forming, as if he had expected nothing less from Michael Ashford. He folded the letter, tucking it away. "Then that settles it," he said quietly, though he knew the town's whispers would not vanish so easily. With a tilt of his hat, he left them to the silence that followed. Della turned to Michael, her voice trembling. "You mean it? Even knowing everything?" His eyes softened, the sternness giving way to something tender. "Della," he said, her name like a vow, "I have carried shame alone long enough. If I must carry it still, I'd rather it be beside someone who makes the weight worth bearing." The fire crackled, rain tapping the windows like a hymn. She felt her heart, once a hollow chamber of rejection, swell with a fragile, blazing hope. She wanted to speak, to give words to the storm of gratitude and love surging within her. But when she opened her mouth, only a sob escaped. Michael stepped closer then, not with haste, but with the slow gravity of a man who understood the sanctity of silence. He lifted her hand, calloused fingers brushing against her skin, and pressed his lips to her knuckles with a tenderness that broke her. In that moment, she knew, this was not pity, not obligation, but love forged in quiet defiance, in the strength of two broken souls who had chosen one another. Spring sunlight spilled across the land the morning of their wedding. There was no grand church, no gilded hall, only the open sky and the scent of blossoms carried on the breeze. Della wore a simple prairie dress, her hair loose, her cheeks flushed with joy. Michael stood tall in his best coat, his gaze fixed only on her. The town gathered, some with doubt, some with softened eyes, but their voices dimmed against the radiance of the vows spoken between the two. No thunder rolled, no great fanfare rang out, only a quiet union that glowed brighter than any spectacle. When Michael lifted her hand once more and kissed it before all, the world seemed to hush, as though the prairie itself bent to honor the dignity of their love. In his silence, she had found shelter. In her trust, he had found redemption. Together, they stood not as castaways, but as a pair forged by fire and tempered by grace. And as the wind carried blossoms across the field, an old truth rose in the air, lingering like a lesson meant for every soul who watched, that love is not thunder nor perfection, but the steady hand that does not let go when the world has turned cold.